Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of a movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose. My Twitter handle, if Twitter still exists when this comes out, is at ThunderGruntBob. And the next person to introduce themselves is going to be Jimmy George.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. My Twitter handle, if it's still there when this comes out, is at Jimmy R. George.
I am Jamie Nash. My Twitter handle is Jamie. I guess you don't need that. You know what that is. Jamie, maybe that'll be gone. Maybe they'll get rid of the at. That'll be the big feature.
You get
Jamie
blocked for that
__ Nash. And I'm not going anywhere on Twitter because it took me a long time to get the followers.
No,
it'll be there forever.
I don't think any of us are leaving. I'm just saying, like,
everybody else is. That's basically what you're saying.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm not paying for anything.
Oh,
so, like,
I never paid for anything. Yeah.
But if that buries us in the algorithm, it was nice knowing everybody that listens. Because we'll never get any traction.
That's a good point. I'll be honest. I already, not to turn this into a Twitter thing, but I already felt like I couldn't get any traction.
Right.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
For the last year.
Right.
So it's, I don't know. To me, I've already sort of given up on it a little bit. I'm still there.
We're still there. If you want to talk to us, you can.
Yeah.
We're not doing anything dangerous, so we shouldn't get our accounts deleted. Anyway,
no.
What we're actually here to talk about today.
Wait, I didn't introduce myself. I just introduced I'm more than a Twitter handle. I'm more than a blue check.
You are.
So,
absolutely.
So I'm a screenwriter and the writer of Save the Cat Writes for TV. And I'm going to put this up front, a brand new book that comes out literally tomorrow from this podcast, but from you, it'll be in the past. So the book is already out. It's called the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. I almost said Save the Cat Writes for TV. It is not. It is not the Save the Cat Writes for TV workbook. It is the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook, and it is a couple hundred glorious pages of prompting you to tell your story. It is story neutral. So if you're a book writer, a TV writer, or a movie writer, it'll help pull it out. Pull that story out from you.
If you just want your blog to be better, you can get this thing.
If you want your blog to be better, yeah. And it's more than just like, taking Save the Cat and adding some white space. It has all kinds of new stuff we talk about on this podcast, new stuff I work on in my classes. It's really, and it's done in a really fun, approachable way. So if you're a beginner, it'll work for you. But we've had, the first group of people that I went to were like pros and advanced people. And they were very excited, and some of them were even going to try it out in their next projects. So anyway, I'm super excited. It's out now. Go to Amazon, pick it up.
And
there you go.
Me and Jimmy are both working on 2 books ourselves. We're going to catch up to Jamie. He's just in the lead for
Not quite.
now. It's just for right now, Jamie. We're going to catch up.
The workbook was easier. It was less words in some ways because you do add the words. So
190 pages of all pictures.
It's just a blank book. You just open it up and it's a blank book.
And it says right here.
Write your story here. And then you just open it up. And that's it. There are no rules, is what it says on page.
It's just
in the age of the internet, some people would buy that ironically.
Yeah.
You actually have sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're not here to talk about Twitter or completely about what we're selling. We're here to talk about, of course, about how E.T. is obviously a Jedi because he was in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and he's using the Force in the movie. No, we're here to talk about E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. If you haven't heard of this movie and you listen to this podcast, my jaw will be on the floor because it's E.T. And I think this is like our 3rd Spielberg movie. I think
so.
It is, right? Because we
Ready Player One,
Jurassic Park,
Ready Player
Raiders,
One.
and this.
So this is number 4. Okay,
and we still got so many that we haven't hit.
And we did Poltergeist, so it's kind of
Poltergeist
one. He wrote it.
That's 4.5.
I mean, this
Spielberg adjacent.
Well,
this is a screenwriting podcast, and he wrote it.
Yeah,
so that's true. Good call.
Some ways that's bigger.
So,
this podcast.
We'll count it 5.
We'll count it 5.
5 out of 87
because of the credits.
And he produced Back to the we won't go that
and Gremlins. Yeah,
Gremlins
it'll take forever.
Jesus.
Before we get into our outline, let's go around the table, the Zoom table, and I mean it's ET, so everyone give a short summation of what your relationship to the movie is. So who wants to start?
Jamie, you want to go?
Sure. So this movie is pretty huge to me. I was telling Bob before we got on this, there was a time where I used to say E.T. was my favorite movie, like as a kid, even though I had seen, and now I say Raiders. So they were always like neck and neck, but it's definitely in my top 5, top 10. It's weird. As an adult, I started to like Jaws more. I started to like Jaws a lot more, and my love of Raiders grew. And honestly, I just watched E.T. so many times. I think maybe I took it down a notch because I had memorized like every beat of the music. Like it's one of those movies where not only do I know every line of dialogue, but literally I can do the soundtrack behind it. Like I can
And what is
sing
soundtrack,
the soundtrack,
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I like it so much. This, just to give you an example, in Save the Cat Rights for TV, I had to do an example of a kind of generic Save the Cat beat sheet that just to show you how a movie fits in the Save. And I chose E.T. just because I know that movie that well. But I didn't have to go and research it anymore. I could just do it off the top of my head. I was just like, okay, then this happens and this happens. So I'm a big E.T. guy. I was 12 when it came out. I'm trying to think, is that right? When did it come out? 82?
82.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was 10 when it came out because I would have been 11. Yeah, 10. I was 10 when it came out, which makes more sense in some ways. But I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense.
That's a perfect age for
E.T. So, and here are the things I was into when I was 10 years old. Okay. First of all, I was into movies. So that's the thing. So Star Wars was huge. I mean, to everybody around me, everybody was Star Wars t-shirts. So we really didn't have merchandising as much for other movies except Grease or something like that. I don't know. But Star Wars was everywhere. The action figures, the lightsabers, all that stuff. We were Star Wars all day. D&D. I played D&D all the time with my little 10-year-old friends. That was something that was coming and very exciting to me. So I played D&D all the time. And BMX. BMX was huge. We all had our mongoose bikes and we're out there trying to jump curbs and doing all that stuff. So when I saw this movie is my childhood 100%. It is, except not California. It has the California spin, and that was the East Coast suburbs, which is a different model.
People penis breath a lot?
That was a term I heard for the first time in this movie. But after this movie, it became a very regular crack that people would kind of say. By the way, the other thing, this movie totally made me a Reese's Pieces convert for many, many years. I haven't had one in years now because now M&M makes all these like really good versions of M&Ms, like the peanut flavor and stuff like that.
I mean, the peanut butter M&Ms are like almost.
They're almost the same, but I think they're even. I'll be honest, they're better. Because the peanut butter.
Oh, I don't know if I can agree there, Jamie.
The
you might
peanut
have
butter
written 2 books, but I'm not going to agree on this.
A hot take on this podcast.
The peanut butter is more peanut buttery in the M&M, the modern day M&M.
But Reese's peanut butter is like its own.
It's its own thing. It doesn't taste like peanut butter, really. It's its own sugary kind of peanut butter flavored confection. But I prefer the real peanut butter to the regular. Okay. So anyway, that is my I think that's all my ET stuff. So I know a ton about ET, like how it's made, watched all the things. I'm a huge ET guy. My son loves it now, so I rewatch a lot of clips often with him. So I'm constantly watching this movie over and over.
You prefer the special edition, of course, right?
Absolutely prefer the special edition. It's funny how Spielberg even backed off on that one.
He's disowned it completely. He's pretty much made it non-existent.
Yeah. Okay, that's me. That's
Jimmy?
me.
All right. I'll try to keep this brief. I not criticizing your long story. I loved it, Jamie. I first of all, I echo the Reese's Pieces thing. I as a kid, because of this movie, I begged for Reese's Pieces all the time. It was like my preferred candy, and I know this had
it made Reese's Pieces.
That's
the reason that it grew.
That's
right?
not surprising at all. So This is the first movie I ever saw in the movie theater. And it's, incredibly special just for that. My mom took me, they used to do this when there was no streaming. There was a summer re-release in 1984. So 2 years after it was out, they put it out again in the theaters. And I saw it, so I was 4. And I saw it in the summer re-release. And it is maybe my oldest memory that I can call back to. Like, I remember it vividly. Sitting in the theater, I have one memory, and it's the sun shot with all the kids on the bikes in the sun. And imagine it, like, I'm 4 years old, like the screen is just absolutely mammoth. So like that beautiful image with the music and the magic, all of it. So it made a huge impression on me just because of that. So yeah, I've never been someone to be like, this is one of my favorite movies. But definitely growing up, I had E.T. toys. I loved the Reese's Pieces. I loved being a kid on a bike after this. I think it became aspirational, like after that for at least for kids in my neighborhood. And I remember one of the first things when I was old enough to like actually hold a bike, I really wanted a bike, and I really wanted a bike with a basket on it. Wore the VHS tape out. I've never watched this for screenwriting purposes in all the years. And so it was really fun to and surprising, as these classics seem to be, like what it does differently that I didn't expect. It was really fun to go back with like a screenwriting lens and deconstruct it and see why it hits. And I think we're going to talk about like why it hits so hard, even though it does things a little differently. So yeah, I love the movie, of course.
I think everyone was just expecting the three of us to say,
yeah, it's love fest.
I realized that we're are you done, Jimmy?
Yeah, I'm done.
We're 87 episodes in, and I realized that every time we talk at the open about our experience with the classic movie, we never have the math right on our ages for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized right now, like when this movie came out, I was 0 years old. I was born in 1982. And I'm realizing right now, Jamie, we're like almost exactly like 10 years apart. I didn't realize that until like this episode. So here's the thing is I had the optimal experience with E.T. as someone who was born the year it came out, probably within a month of when it came out, because I was born in May. I don't know when E.T. was released that wise, but like I think it was the summer. I think it was the middle of the summer.
I think it was May or June. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So growing up, just as the impact of a singular movie that isn't a franchise, growing up, E.T. was enormous in my household. Like I still to this day have the VHS tape with the green hood on it. You know how it had that green slab on it? Like I still have the original VHS tape that my parents bought me. Still works, everything. But what I'm saying basically is like to think about that time period where Jamie was saying and how big it was when you saw Jamie, and then to think like mid 90s. E.T. is a staple of pop culture and my life. Even then, at that point, how much longer after? That's not like unheard of for a lot of movies. They just disappear. You know what I mean? Like the fact that E.T. was so huge and became like pretty much staple viewing that much longer away.
Right.
It was talked about in pop culture. It was such a staple when I was growing up, and I never back then understood that it literally came out when I was born. I never had that in my mind's eye. To me, it was a new movie, because I couldn't comprehend it until like the late 80s
right
at all. You know what I mean? Like, so even by the time I could comprehend it, and of course, like this all means that I do love it. I'm kind of with Jimmy is I've never said it's my favorite movie, but I'll say this, I love it more now. Like as a kid, I obviously loved it, but now it hits me even harder. I mean, like, I'm not even going to lie to all of our listeners here. I'll just say it to you guys too. Like I teared up when I watched it for this fucking episode. Like
me too.
I teared up. I mean, like I didn't used to do that as a kid. I don't know what it hits me harder now.
I think this is a weird thing I've noticed, because I know Star Wars can give me goosebumps sometimes, even these crappy trilogy kind of, not that they're crappy, but they're not as great as the original. I think the music really does that to you too.
John Williams, man. In Epic Rap Battles of History on YouTube, one of the lines is, "Yo, half your million should go to John Williams." and it's not that Spielberg doesn't deserve credit. It's just like, man, that score at the end, I'll be right here. The music swells up. It's Hollywood. It's cinema. That's the religion of cinema for our age group.
Dun, 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 dun.
It's like you just can't get away from that. You know what I mean? Even if I didn't love E.T., I respect it as the Beatles of this era of cinema. You know what I mean? It just is. And it always was,
And that, as we transition here into saying who wrote it and stuff like that, the one thing I will also say that I remember very fondly from being a kid that age, and keep in mind, Raiders was the movie that made me interested in filmmaking in some ways, because it melded Spielberg, the Jaws Close Encounters guy, with Lucas. So I started to realize. So by the time this came out, I was like paying attention to trailers. I was a movie kid in some ways. And these two trailers hit back to back. E.T. and Poltergeist. They hit back to back, literally in the same, like, I don't know what movie I was seeing, but these two, and they were both done mysterious, almost like a horror movie in some ways. Like E.T., they didn't tell you anything. It was just like, E.T. is Adventures on Earth. Come see it. And that was it. But it was mysterious music and stuff. And then this Poltergeist thing, they're here. And it was like,
gosh,
both Spielberg, and they're both kind of
for anyone listening, we have done Poltergeist. Go back to the catalog. Yeah,
we have. And it's almost interesting if you've never seen it. Go see if you can. It's funny because my son who has autism finds these weird things, and he's found the ET trailer, and I probably saw it for the first time in years. Just go back and look at it, because I remember being in the theater and seeing that trailer and being, what the hell is ET? I don't know what that is. And Spielberg had this way of quoting, kind of nailing phrases like that you've never heard of. Like, I had never heard the word extraterrestrial before. I mean, that seems weird now. Just like we had never heard the word close encounters back then.
Yeah.
And
mental real estate, dude.
And we never heard the word poltergeist back then. I think that was kind of his thing. I mean, maybe not Jaws, because that was a book, but he wanted to kind of plant these. He dug for these words and made them the title. But anyway, it was like, oh, what is this? It's coming this summer. I have to see these two movies. And it was, I was so excited.
I mean, look, I'm just going to say this. I might have said this in the show before, but the summer of 1982, when I was born, when I was birthed into the world, I still believe is like the greatest summer of movies ever. Because you had I could name the big ones.
Okay, go for it.
Well,
because I'm about to read them.
I don't know the order, but
put you to the test.
You got E.T., you got Poltergeist, you got Rocky 3, you got Star Trek 4, Conan the Barbarian.
Star Trek 2,
Wrath of Khan, dude.
Star Trek 2. That's my bad. Star Trek 2.
A must do on this show.
Every one of those to me is a banger, is a complete classic that I love.
There are a couple more that, like, those are all huge for me. Like Wrath of Khan, totally.
Right.
But there's some that I don't know, maybe this one's problematic today, but Tootsie was a big movie back when I was a kid. I saw that.
I think it's because it's on Broadway and people don't want it to be like rebirthed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not the movie so much; it is the play.
I wasn't sure if there was something, because
it's not beloved anymore. But
he plays. Dustin plays a Dustin character. So, but then there's this is a weird one, but Porky's was. I can't tell you how watershed Porky's was. Like, it's kind of forgotten. Speaking of problematic movies, right?
Yeah.
But when you're like 10 years old, all the kids sneaking it, you know what I mean? It's that movie.
It's a franchise, and without Porky's existing, A Christmas Story would have never happened.
How about that?
Because Bob Clark would have never gotten the studio to let him make A Christmas Story. So.
This is another one of those years that I saw like all of these movies in the theater. Gandhi came out that year. We did a field trip to that movie, and that that was eye-opening for me as like a 10, 11-year-old when I finally saw it. First Blood came out that year. 48 Hours came out that year. This is a weird one, but I saw this in the theater too. The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. I saw that's at 9. Annie came out. Annie was a huge event that year. The Toy, Firefox. I saw all these movies in the theater. The Dark Crystal came out that year.
Yes.
So I saw like the first 20 movies. This is another one of these years. So I saw all of these in the movie theater. The only one I could see that I didn't see in the movie theater, I don't think I saw 48 Hours in the movie theater, probably because I was 10. And I didn't see An Officer and a Gentleman. That just wasn't my genre. I saw it years later. But everything else I saw in the theater. But
where did E.T. fall in this box office?
Number one.
Number one.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I was just about to hit
we
that.
Didn't say it, but I figured that was common knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Like,
so
E.T.
So I don't know the way Box Office Mojo does this. This might be with all the re-releases and stuff packed in. But it has it on this list I'm looking at right here on Box Office Mojo. It has it at 359 million. And the
Global?
nearest competitor, that's worldwide. And the nearest competitor, though it's weird. I don't know what the heck this is now, because it has it listed domestic and worldwide as the same number, and it does that for all of these. So I don't know what's going on with Box Office Mojo here, but so now I'm upset with that. And then it has Tootsie at 177.
Oh wow!
Right beneath it. So I don't know what that means exactly.
Is that including inflation? That's not including inflation, though, right?
No.
That number.
So that's 1982, 359 million.
Yeah,
right.
that must be what it is. Because I'm looking at
now even a bad Marvel movie makes like double that.
Yeah,
so yeah, it's not.
So I'm looking at IMDb's version of the same thing, and it has it at 793 million worldwide.
That seems more accurate.
Yeah. It has 437 million domestically. But when E.T. came out, it was the number one movie of all time, I believe. I'm 99% sure about that. Like Star Wars was there, and then
the blockbusters of its of ever. Yeah.
And then of course eventually I think Titanic beat it. I think that was the movie that beat
Park
it. And I don't know, did Jurassic Park beat it? I'm not sure if it did because of all the re-release
number one
money.
Movie of all time.
Was it?
Okay. Yeah, they're Jurassic Park, then Independence Day, then Titanic. I remember this stuff. I was like,
for some reason, I thought E.T. was like unbeatable for a while.
No, Jurassic Park.
With Jurassic Park until
I might
Titanic
eat those words, but I'm almost. I'm
not sure.
Someone's gonna tag you on Twitter and be like, "You're wrong, man.
Come at me.
You're wrong."
I literally remember Will Smith being on like the Tonight Show and saying, and celebrating Independence Day beating Jurassic Park, so it was the number one earner of all time. Hence, what I just said would have to be true, right? Like, I know that happened. I literally remember that,
But the only thing, because I'm shocked that Independence Day is the topper of either of those movies in some ways, even though I know it made a ton of money. I wonder if that's like the number one weekend or something like that, or I don't know.
Maybe it was. I was young. Maybe it was. I could be wrong.
And now they probably have
updated. If I'm wrong.
Now they probably have them all updated for inflation, so it's probably
you
really
can't even figure it out.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. You'd have to go back to the actual thing you saw him on to see what that was.
I'll accept defeat if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
I remember that. I remember that Tonight Show.
I probably stopped paying attention to that in 1990, so it's
right.
all good.
I mean, it doesn't really matter.
No.
Well, with all that, Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yes. So Melissa Matheson wrote this script. Melissa Matheson at the time was married to Harrison Ford. That was her, they always talk about that story because Spielberg actually pitched her this movie on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark. He made her, apparently she cried when she heard it. She heard his pitch. So, but here, interesting fact, I don't know if it's a fact or not. Spielberg says it is. She wouldn't do it. She turned it down because she was feeling really negative about herself after she did the Black Stallion, and that was her huge kind of breakout. And then she started working on something of her own or something. It wasn't coming out good. and she just wanted to quit writing. So she had that very, as writers, we all kind of know those feelings where you just want to quit. You're like, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. And he pitched her E.T. because he liked the Black Stallion. He knew Harrison. She was kind of in the family. She said no. He basically had Harrison and Kathleen Kennedy kind of work her to try to get her to write it. And she eventually did. Did.
The one thing I read up on before this episode, I was telling Jamie a little bit about, was like the unmade horror movie Night Skies that Spielberg was supposed to make. And I actually didn't know this one detail, that in the movie Night Skies, in the script, there were several different aliens, and like one was like the leader. It was kind of like the Gremlins aspect. One was the leader, and one was the silly one. One was the nice one that got along with the child in the movie.
The gizmo.
The gizmo of it. And apparently like that aspect is what Spielberg latched onto in the script, and he took that aspect, and that's what eventually became E.T. with Melissa Mathison. Like they got rid of the horror movie around it and just kept the boy and the alien. I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. I knew about Night Skies and stuff. I just didn't know that.
There's also kind of a famous tidbit. I don't know what that is. That's another movie.
That's another thing. Yeah.
Tidbit. That's an E.T. knockoff movie. So there was when he did Close Encounters, Truffaut said to him, like, you're really good with children. You should make a children's movie. And supposedly he really wanted to do a children's movie. He took that to heart. He was like, I am good with children. I should do a children's movie. And he had Zemeckis and maybe Bob Gale, is that who Zemeckis write a script that was some kind of kids movie coming of age. But when they finished it, it was like, and I can't remember the title. It escapes me at the moment, but it ended up being like this R-rated kind of like, raunchy. Yeah. And he was like, this isn't what I meant. So then he moved back to E.T., but he was thinking about
and then they went off and made Mac and Me. No.
Exactly. So, but
we got the Mac and Me reference in. Yes.
I had
check the box.
We can't not mention Mac and Me.
So Night Skies was, it was based off of a true incident. I always forget the Hopkinsville something incident, and the script is out there if you want to read it. I've read it before. It's not great. It's kind of like a home invasion.
It's also a first draft.
It's a first draft. Yeah. It's John Sayles. It's just not much to it. It's kind of like a home invasion movie in some ways, with small aliens.
You can see the alien designs online too that Rick Baker did, and that's also why Rick Baker won't talk and work with Steven Spielberg anymore.
Yes,
Night Skies didn't happen.
Yeah, Spielberg kind of broke his heart. Spielberg came back and said, "I'm not doing this one. I'm doing this E.T. thing." He wanted him to do E.T. as well, but he said he just didn't have it in him at that point. So,
fun E.T. backstory is
relevant.
No, seriously, like anyone interested, it's a good play. If you're interested about the genesis of E.T., look up Night Skies.
So
it's very interesting.
Yeah, and super quick on Melissa Mathison, Black Stallion, E.T. This is one that we just found out. She wrote the Twilight Zone Kick the Can segment, credited as Josh Rogan. So we don't know the backstory why she changed her name.
I'm gonna say it's the tragedy. It's the tragedy. Yeah.
And she did something called Son of the Morning Star, never heard of. Oh, I skipped over a movie I never heard of called The Escape Artist that I'm shocked I've never heard of, and I knew nothing about it, but it has a pretty big cast.
Right? I mean, Jimmy, you've never heard of it, right?
Never heard of it.
Okay.
And it made very little money, so it seems like it kind of got buried, but I'm very curious about it. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
Ponyo and Kundun.
Yeah, Kundun is the weird one in her because it's Scorsese.
I didn't. That's awesome. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure without clicking on it, the Black Stallion was a zoetrope. Like, so she was in with that Francis Ford Coppola kind of mix. The Escape Artist was also a zoetrope. So she was in that mix. But she probably knew those dudes, the Scorsese and Coppola and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, she wrote for Spielberg, Scorsese, and Frank Oz. That's awesome.
Shit.
That's a career, man. It's great.
Wow.
And then after Kundun, she really didn't have much. She has The Emperor's New Clothes, an all-star illustrated retelling of the classic fairy tale. And then I don't know what that is. And then she did So then she goes from 1997 to 2008 is her next credit. It's and that's Ponyo. And then she did the BFG in 2016. She passed away in 2015. So the BFG must have come out after she had passed away.
Yeah.
She was married to Harrison Ford. And it says on Wikipedia, she died November 4th, 2015 in Los Angeles, age 65.
Rest in peace, and what a legacy!
What a legacy! What a career!
Man. Yeah.
My gosh!
I'm definitely gonna watch The Escape Artist now.
Yeah, we got to find it.
It's probably on YouTube or something. It's probably one of those weird ones.
Tubi or something.
Yeah,
I'll definitely watch it. Genre discussion.
Yeah, I popped this on here because I figured it was a perfect time for Jamie to reference.
We don't have this. It's to say one of the Save the Cat genres, right? Like,
I feel like
we don't get Buddy Loves that often on the show.
That's why I wanted to bring it up for Jamie to go down.
This is one I think Blake calls these, like, I'm not sure if he calls it animal genres or something. It's like a pet genre with the Black Stallion. I mean, not to put E.T. as a pet or an but because he's a creature, it's not a love story.
It has that relationship.
No, I mean, as a guy like Mike in my neighborhood, and it hit like when I found my cat, and then like now I have like a loving relationship with this, with this animal that like showed up at right outside my house. So it does feel like a cat, like a pet, and ET even purrs like a cat, which I didn't remember. But
I almost feel like you could argue that ET became like a template for this type of movie later on, right?
Or maybe we're just we don't have our fingers on the pulse of the culture then, and maybe there were other movies that were playing around with this already that it's doing the same thing,
Well, first, Jamie, can you give us the quick rundown on what the genres are?
Yeah, the genres, and we talk about them very often on this podcast because they're always fun to kind of throw in there. They're Save the Cat story patterns. So you find these, they're not your traditional genres like sci-fi or horror or things like that. These are more kind of hinting at what types of story you're telling, not necessarily what type of audience would be interested in the story. Buddy Love is I always start with Golden Fleece as an example of somebody on a quest or somebody trying to win a trophy, and it could be anything from like a sports movie like Major League or Dodgeball to Lord of the Rings, which they're trying to quest to get to Mount Doom to throw the ring into. There's usually a road of some sort, whether it's a season or traditional road. There's some kind of final thing they're trying to get to, and those are called Golden Fleece stories. I just use that as an example. There's also Monster in the House we talk about all the time, where there's a monster, there's people trapped in the house. They're trying to escape. Today, we're going to talk about one we hardly ever talk about, which is Buddy Love. Buddy Love is the romances, but it's also the friendship and the buddy stories. So whether it's 48 Hours, which we just referenced, is kind of a buddy love story. Harry Met Sally could be a buddy love story, but also the Black Stallion could be a buddy love story, and E.T. can be a buddy love story as well. Buddy loves usually have the requirements of two individuals that are buddies. It's two buddies. Usually there's something that they can teach themselves about each other. Now, I'm not sure that E.T. learns anything from Elliot in this, but that's tradition.
Maybe just how to be human.
He learns Earth stuff.
Earth stuff. Yeah. How to be an Earthling. Yeah.
Usually they both need
he learns
each other.
About junk food.
Beer.
Beer and candy.
Yeah, and how to dress himself or something.
Right.
Halloween. But so usually they have something that they can learn from each other, and they kind of both learn something from each other. There's usually a complication that either keeps them together or forces them apart, one or the other. So a lot of the romance stories are kind of force them apart. Like they're in love, but they can never be together. Romeo and Juliet, for example. Or it's the opposite, where they kind of hate each other, but they're stuck together. And that's a lot of your buddy cop movies, right? This one kind of is doesn't have that as much, but there is a complication that kind of keeps them together, and that ET's kind of stuck and in danger and stuff like that. So he is stuck there. They can't really quit each other just from, even if they wanted to.
Also, the added element of like them being connected, like I guess you'd say psychically or something that adds adds something to the buddy
definitely
love
part
genre,
of it.
you know, he feels what ET feels.
I think most boy and their dog, girl and their dog, Black Stallion kind of stories, they probably have a similar. That's why I put ET in that category. They have similar feels to this, in that it's not like they hate each other. It's not that they love each other in that way, but they are kind of stuck together. And they do have like that love, quote unquote, friendship for each other, whatever that thing is. So,
well, what's good is like, you know, you always talk about how these are for brainstorming techniques. Like, you know, if you identify that you've got a concept, you've got a premise that you're trying to figure out how to, you know, deliver on the promise. You can kind of look at these other films that are also buddy love. Once you identify what your genre is, you can identify the patterns, and that gives you an easy answers on what to subvert, what to do, what not to do, and what to do but subvert it in how you're doing it, you know, like, so I think it's a really good tool.
I think this movie kicked off like a whole genre of pretty successful buddy love supernatural kind of movies, like Harry and the Hendersons, Short Circuit, to it, you know, lots of different ones that kind of have
Batteries not included.
Batteries not included. Yeah. Mac and Me.
I was going to mention Harry.
Yeah. They all follow the same patterns. Yeah.
To me, my age group, Harry was like my ET. What are you talking about when it was released and stuff? Like that was that big for me, even though I don't think it was as big in the world.
Sure. It was a successful movie. I mean, I think it got sequels, didn't it? Is there a Harry and
TV show?
A TV show.
TV show. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. With the same guy in the suit. The family was different, of course. Let's talk about the opening sequence. What did you want to talk about? The plotting your own? Explain that.
Yeah. So this opening sequence, for whatever reason, much like Raiders of the Lost Ark, really, when I was a kid, kind of taught me like what opening sequences could be in a movie. You know, I was like, wow, these things can just, and I think everything I wrote after that point was trying to rip off ET for, it was like alien being chased or something like that. But I see these so often because most
altered,
yeah, for sure. And I see these kind of opening sequences so often in scripts, but they're inferior, and I'll tell you why. This is a pet peeve of mine that I get a lot. I get a lot of people that write a teaser. A lot of times it's horror. And I think I've talked about this on the show before because I see this one so often. Somebody's running. They're running. Somebody's chasing them. They're chasing them. And then they get hit or maybe it just cuts or whatever. And it's just that. It's just like somebody's running. No information. Yeah. There's no empathy for the character. There's no twists and turns. And whenever I look at the ET one, it's a short story unto itself. Mm-hmm. You could almost do a Save the Cat beat sheet for it. Almost. You could say, you know, the opening image, the spaceship, or the stars, right? The stars are the opening. The mysterious stars are the opening image. The setup, aliens are looking for, you know, fauna or whatever they're doing. I learned that more from the Universal ride. So they're doing something.
It's canon.
They're botanists. They're botanists. I forgot to mention one of my huge influences. Well, I read the novelization for this, and I had all that stuff in. When I was a kid, I loved the novelization for this movie. But anyway,
a sequel would have always been wild because they would have shown that kind of stuff. Like,
and there is that weird sequel out there that had Spielberg's involvement that's really bad, Nocturnal Fears. If you ever go look it up, there is a sequel treatment out there that he was involved in that he realized it was ridiculous and squashed. But anyway, go search it out. So anyway, setup is they're searching. Cars pull up. Who are these people? Do they know the aliens are there? Do they not? That sets off a debate. Do they know? What's up? They're kind of looking around. Break into two. Their heart lights go off. Come back to the ship. Now a chase is on. So there's a whole story going on here with twists and turns and beginning, and we're thrown into it, so we don't know what's going on. We don't know who these aliens are. We don't know what this movie's about. I know that's hard to imagine, but if you go back and watch that teaser trailer, I wasn't entirely sure when I saw this movie what this movie was about. It just showed a spaceship and aliens walking, and then there was this big chase with flashlights.
For all you know, ET could be evil.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. When I saw this movie, I know this is hard to believe, but back then there were a lot of movies I'd go to. I didn't know what extraterrestrial meant. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. And I sat there and I was learning beat for beat.
Also,
so anyway,
Spielberg's name was kind of associated with horror at that point, right? Because
it was.
Right. Yeah.
And again, Poltergeist ET, I kind of got the two mixed up. I was like,
right.
These two movies coming out that are both kind of mysterious and scary a little bit. But anyway, then he goes back. He doesn't get on the ship. The ship flies away. So there's twists and turns. There's all this it's kind of an all is lost moment. He's stuck. He looks out. He looks out on this mysterious, Los Angeles city. I guess what part of the valley is that? Is that what that is?
They don't specify.
Yeah. So he looks out in that light grid, and it's mysterious to him. It's alien to him, like the stars. It's almost like an opening closing image bookended. I think that
we're putting his shoes and everything.
We're putting his shoes.
Yeah.
I think there's a ton of stuff to learn about opening sequences for this. They could have easily just had open up. E.T. running, and the spaceship goes away. But there's a lot more to it than that. So my advice to writers, and Jimmy, you might have some thoughts on this too. When I read those sequences, at least give me like one plot twist, scene turn. Give me at least one thing. And the other thing that's great about this sequence, and this movie is really great if you line it up. It really delivers plot after plot after plot after plot in its scenes. So this scene is really, in some ways, a catalyst for ET. The ship's gone.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's got forward momentum. We have an alien trapped on Earth with no place to go.
The photo finish is set up in the opening.
Right.
We know what we're rooting for to happen by the end of the story, right within 5 minutes. So
Yep.
My only bounce off of what you said, because I think you covered it well. It makes me think of a couple things. That phrase that we need on a T-shirt: make every movie a sequel to a movie that just happened that we never saw.
Right.
It definitely feels like that. It definitely feels like we are watching part 2 right from the start, and part 1 was like ET's ship, arriving, the journey to Earth and landing on Earth, and what are they're gathering, organic material.
They're gathering,
all this stuff. So that sort of mindset of approaching it that way with this off-screen first movie that we're watching the sequel to, I think that's tracks here. And that also is the same thing as in media res that we talk about a lot, which is Jamie, you said, you don't want to see them running. You want to learn a little bit about them before they start running. But the in media res here works really well. And then the other thing, I didn't track it. And I tracked a shit ton of stuff that we're going to get to. There's book reports galore that I'm probably going to cut short. But this is very reminiscent of the Scream opening where we did the good news, bad news. And there was, in the Scream opening, it's 12 minutes of good news, bad news, and it's just nonstop good news, bad news, good news, bad news, good news, bad news for 12 minutes. And that's why it feels like very gripping, in these rises and falls and these twists and turns. And I think that if you did a good news, bad news technique for this sequence, you would find that they do that. So that's another thing that I think you can learn from the opening sequence, is the good news, bad news aspect to it. And if anyone's not familiar with it, good news, bad news technique is basically you have the beginning of a scene and you're like, how do I get to the end of the scene, but keep it really interesting? And one easy way is to just take a blank sheet of paper, write the beginning of the scene at the top, write the end of the scene at the bottom, and just write prompts for yourself. Good news, bad news, good news, bad news, good news, bad news. And until you get to the bottom, and just forcing yourself to kind of imagine how things are going right then things go wrong. These progress and regression, it's going to make the scene more interesting and more compelling. So, yeah.
The one lesson that I think, Jamie, to go back to what you're saying with like how this movie has like those chunks, the one lesson from this show that I'll never forget, I think it was around our first couple episodes, where Jimmy might have said, or you might have said, that if you're trying to approach a movie, breathe in and just make 8 short films strung together.
The sequence method, yeah.
Sequence method, right. I'm glad you had, I forgot the name. But like when I was watching the movie for this purpose, I felt like the sequences here, like you said, they all really work within themselves so well for a movie this iconic. I never noticed.
I don't know if that is I don't know this for sure, but I get the feeling most of the movies from this era were using some kind of sequence method technique to write. Right. It just feels that way.
Like it, yeah.
This movie reminds me a lot of the Star Wars opening in some ways too. You have that in media res of the spaceship chase, and you meet the villain shows up. The end of the scene is kind of them getting away, which kicks off the whole movie. There's a lot of similarities between this and the opening sequence of Star Wars, just from an emotional plot delivery sort of feel.
Well, okay, let's talk about the star of the second opening of this movie.
The second
opening. Well, it's the
you're right.
E.T., and then there's the second opening, which is the introduction to the family, but most importantly, Elliot. Right? Like it's a much different opening to a character.
Yeah, I'm really excited now that I put this on the talking points before I had known that Jamie used E.T. as a beat sheet example in the past, because I don't know, when I think of E.T., and again, this is the first time I've looked at it from a screenwriting lens, I don't really think of Elliot's personal journey. I just think of the alien part of it mostly, and I do think of the bonding and stuff like that. But anyway, but I do think there's an arc. And Jamie, do you want to kind of start and see if we are on the same page, or did you do that in your Save the Cat beat sheet?
I did in a beat sheet sort of way. It's got a theme stated. It's got a theme stated, and I kind of hint at what the end is that he delivers in the dig down deep aspect.
Yes. Okay.
So, and I don't think there's a huge arc like a lot of early Spielberg, Lucas movies, like Raiders. It's debatable. We go to Marion and stuff like that, and is that the thing people remember from the movie? Is that the message? I think it is. I think it's the heart of the movie, but still, it doesn't feel necessarily like they started with the Marion story and then built Raiders of the Lost Ark around it or something like that. Though E.T.,
you feel that for Elliot too, right? Like
I feel like Elliot's a little. It's a harder to find. They're not as on the nose about the arc. One of the things I admire about E.T. that I always say, like when people say, it's a crappy kids movie, blah blah blah. There's this weird independent. You get a lot of people that hate E.T. There's a lot of E.T. haters.
It's very sentimental. It's very
because it's sentimental.
That's it.
You gotta.
God forbid you feel emotions when you watch something.
It's not cynical. Yeah.
The thing I always loved about it is it has a very DIY vibe. And it feels like an indie movie in a weird sort of way. There's just
that was one thing that I was struck by. Yeah, the wide shots that stay wide for 2 minutes, and
I mean, all you have to do is compare it to two movies people like, but are very different, like Short Circuit and Harry and the Hendersons. And those are very Hollywood, made for money kind of movies. In my feeling, and that's not to be negative about them at all. They have their merits, but this movie was his biographical movie. I know he's about to make another one. It's about him growing up. This is about a childhood friend he had after his divorce, and that's what he wanted to put in this movie. So this movie has a huge biographical
is
component.
Cinema. It's representative of him discovering cinema in his own life.
So it has that. It's a lot of his feelings about divorce and things like that. So I this movie is more built around the kid that feels lonely after his parents' divorce and how he becomes whole by the end of it. And I think so. What I pegged as the theme, because I think that vibe alone, just going from feeling lonely to kind of being healed is sort of what the arc is, but it's not really said in the text as much. So for my purposes with the beat sheet, I couched it more in feelings and empathy. I think it's an empathy thing. Like, for example, for the theme stated, I had it being that scene where Michael says, "Why don't you grow up and think about how other people feel for a change?" You know, classic theme stated, right? Because theme stated beats.
That's their go to the classroom at the dinner table there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Theme stated, sir, when you call someone out on their flaw, right? Yeah. Another character. And then in the end, not only is so the way I see him arcing in the end is, and there's all kinds of empathy things like in the text, like the fact that they're linked and he feels what E.T. feels and, you know, stuff like that. Like, and
it goes from him talking about himself, it's I to we. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
It's like all that stuff. So there's a slow growth of somebody who, not that I see Elliot as being super selfish in the beginning.
He's not overtly
like he's just a kid who thinks about himself. Like, it's natural for his age.
It's almost a natural growth arc. Like just grew up a little faster than everybody else.
That's why he says it has more of an independent, realistic feel. Because there's a Hollywood version where you make him selfish in the beginning, and he's, you know, he's kind of a jerk. But this movie doesn't do that as much. But by the end, like I said, with the dig down deep, he is literally, because he knows what's best for his friend, giving up his friend basically forever for his own good. He is choosing to part with that friend, like that, you know, as part of his growth, in my opinion.
Yes.
And so that's where I think the theme in the arc is in the character.
I don't think Bob and I are going to disagree with you. I'm going to agree.
How could we?
I'm going to yes and for this. Yes and. So I am 100%. I figured, but since you wrote the book on it, technically, I figured I would let you start because.
By the way, this is in Satan the Cat Writes for TV, and a lot of people crapped on me for doing this because
it's not TV.
Because it's not TV. But I was like, if I put a TV one, it has all these caveats, so I can't. Yeah. Like, if you read my book, there's a good reason why it's not TV, because you have to know the regular one before you get to the TV one.
Yeah, I understand.
Anyway.
But no, so a couple things. So, you know, for one thing, we have a kid who I thought you were going to talk about, which you did, you just didn't label it, the concept of stasis equals death, which is, you know, it's like when you meet a character, it's one way to establish their need is to show the audience, quote unquote, something that Blake Snyder calls the stasis equals death, which is like, if the character continues to behave this way, they'll never grow. They'll never become the best version of themselves. So when we meet him, he's with that dinner table scene, he's thinking about himself. He's not thinking about it. He intentionally, like, to spite his mom and to make her feel bad, he like does a jab about like, well, my dad's in Mexico with Sally, you know, and it's devastating to his mom. And he sees that, and we get that nice little moment where he's like, damn, I'm an asshole. But that line, like you said, like, can't you just grow up and think of somebody else for once in a while? That's the whole movie, right? And like, who's Elliot's agent of change? An alien who literally shows people his heart. Like, I think that's very intentional. That's thematic. Like, that choice in the creature design is thematic, right? Like when people
shares his heart with Elliot.
Yes, like, and but like, you know, people who show you their heart, you know, it's because they're trying to empathize with you,
right?
Whereas people who are all about themselves, they'll never show you their heart, you know. So I think that's writing. That's in the writing. That was a creative choice to make his heart be shown. But I just wanted to mention, like, this movie does a great job, and I tracked them all, but I'm only going to mention a couple. You know, we've talked about in the past how sometimes an arc you don't feel the arc when it happens in the end, and that's because the writer hasn't given us enough growing pains along the way. And you really need those growing pains along the way in order to make that growth moment hit as you intend. And otherwise it feels like, quote unquote, a beat sheet moment where it's like someone wrote on the page, like, Elliot, grows and
Elliot fully accepts himself now.
He fully empathizes with others now and lets ET go, but we have nothing in between to prove that to the audience. So I don't want to go through all of them, but this movie has 7 moments of growth specifically related around Elliot's lack of empathy and then gaining empathy. And then again, he takes a step back. I call them growth spurts and growing pains, so that he goes forward, he makes progress toward empathy, and then he goes backwards. And that's the thing, just like good news, bad news, with arcs, you need the same thing. It can't just be all good news. It can't just be all growth. You have to take steps back, because we as people, we're constantly kind of, regressing a little, progressing, then regressing. So I'll give you a couple good examples. So at 70 minutes, when E.T. and him go out to the bald spot in the forest and they're using the umbrella communication device, when E.T. is phoning home for the first time, Elliot goes into this big monologue trying to convince him to stay, right? Because he's not thinking about E.T. He's thinking about himself.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'll take care of you. Like, we can grow old together. It'll be great. You don't want to leave. That's because that's a moment of regression for Elliot. For a moment, he's taking a step back to that kid that we met in the beginning. So that's a very measurable growing pain. And that is, there's not really that much old way, new way here, where you show a character's, the choices they made before they grew, before they arced, and then you give them the same choice to show the audience how they've grown and arced. And that is the moment of old way, new way. That's like the one we get when he's trying to talk him into staying on Earth. And then in the climax, we have that same spot, same location, same scenario, except now the ship is here. And E.T. does say, come, and Elliot does say stay, but ultimately he makes the choice to not fight it. And he says goodbye to his friends. So that is a new way, right? That does show, that is measurable. We as an audience can go, oh, he's accepting this. He's thinking about E.T., not himself. He even says, like, and then they do that ouch back and forth where Elliot points to his heart and says ouch to show that he cares, right? So I think this is a good example of showing the audience growing pains that prove that the character has arced by the story's end. And that was all I wanted to yes and with you, Jamie.
No, it makes sense.
Great.
That's great. Yeah, thanks.
It's a hard one to kind of parse, I think, for the average person.
Yeah, like, because they do it naturally, like you said, Jamie. It's very Indian. It's very the realism in Elliot's character is like, it's not Hollywood in that way.
Yeah,
it's not like John Lithgow being an animal hunter at the beginning,
right?
Karen Henderson's, and then being like a vegetarian at the end,
And I think a lot of these movies came from a vibe from the 70s as opposed to the 80s. I think that once you get in the 80s, they start transitioning and they're a little bit more obvious and on the nose about things. It's something I think we've kind of stuck with since the 80s to an extent, and but that's why I like this vibe. I think Raiders had it. I think a lot of the early Spielberg and Lucas stuff had it.
It's more nuanced. If anything.
It's more nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost anti calling it out. As if they called it out, they'd probably edit it out. They'd be like, no, that's too obvious. Whereas honestly, today, at least when I go through development processes and stuff, you almost have to call it out. They want it, especially in a kids movie. I mean, if you get that's kind of why I like working in the horror genre, because a lot of times I work in the horror genre. If you call things out too much, it betrays the reality and makes things less scary. So they kind of like to hide it. They almost prefer not to have any of that stuff. So anyway, that's an aside.
It kind of reminds you you're watching a movie, probably.
It does, and which is okay in a kids movie if you're doing if you're doing
comedy or something.
It depends on the tone, right? It's all the tone.
But
the Batman scale.
Yeah, but if you were doing like the Blair Witch Project or something, and all of a sudden you're doing this kind of corny, like, here's what I learned today, It's like, no, don't do that. That's
It actually pauses.
it pauses.
We learn.
It reminds you of the lack of reality. It makes things less scary in a horror movie or something like that.
You want to talk about superior position?
I kind of
and explain that to listeners too.
I kind of want to just breeze through this one. I don't have any specific examples, but I think that Jamie, do you want to explain superior position, and then we'll just kind of like bounce off of each other?
Sure. So superior position is, most movies, I wouldn't even say most, but a lot of movies, traditional movies, and honestly, the ones I recommend you try writing at first, unless you have a good reason for it, is to try to put us in the POV of the character. So imagine E.T. if we didn't know E.T. was out there, in the beginning, like it was purely like, oh, there might be a coyote out there. And it was purely from Elliot's point of view. So we learned about E.T. as Elliot learned about E.T. So superior position is the opposite, which is what this movie does. We know it's E.T. out there. We've seen it. We've seen the movie from his point of view. We've seen him looking around. So when Elliot's out there looking for E.T., we know it's E.T. out there. That's kind of a simple example of superior position.
The movie has superior position on like Keyes, the villain.
It gives
like that. Like, yeah, that's where it has.
It gives the audience an advantage of knowing what's going on over Elliot, who's the lead character.
Yes, we're often ahead, and I think it's very instructive in how this movie. There's a totally different version of this movie where, like you said, Jamie, where we never know where the villains are, and we are only experiencing it because it's a choice, right? It's like first person. It's like in novels, like first person, second person, third person, and movies do this interesting thing where you can swap that, but you can also make a choice to just be first person, right? Only Elliot's perspective all the time, and there's a very different version of this movie where if we only knew what Elliot knew, it just changes the whole thing. And I think it's very interesting in how, like, we always know where the villains are. We always know where E.T. is, even if other people don't. We're always ahead of Elliot, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is really interesting. And I think it creates like this deeper concern for him, and this deeper, I don't know. It makes me like him more. It makes me worry about him more. Yeah. It creates more tension.
He's on a journey more in front of our eyes because he doesn't. Yeah. We're ahead of him, right?
Yeah.
I think another thing, like a lot of these 70s people, especially Spielberg, it's that Hitchcockian kind of thing, right? And they get very playful with their with the POV. Like you can almost feel it feels almost calculated. Like, what's the most interesting way to do this? Should I let people in on it? Should I hide it?
We get ET POV lots throughout the story too, like from his eyes. And I wonder if that's in the script too, or if it actually specifies ET POV. I bet it does.
It's like one example I always give of this is I've always been curious. I'm a big fan of the Truman Show, right? But I was always curious as to what if it was like the M. Night version of the Truman Show. We didn't give superior position. It was a big twist. I'm in a reality show, or something.
Yeah.
Sorry if that. I guess it's not a spoiler.
No.
Spoil the Truman Show. It's been long.
No,
enough.
But
we should do the Truman Show.
I think it's really interesting, like the perspective shifts, because occasionally it does shift. Like right after we know where ET is, and then all of a sudden they take that superior position away, and we only know what they know, which is like ET is missing, and how that changes the game for us all as an audience. How that all of a sudden creates it's like a rug pull, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the superior position in this movie relates to the next thing we're going to talk about too, which is this movie is a movie where he hides him as a friend. Where does the tension and the obstacles come from? It comes from hiding him from mom. But imagine if we didn't know anybody was chasing after ET.
Right.
There wouldn't be a lot of tension in any of the scenes. But because we know there's a whole group of people that are really on the case. I mean, they almost pretty much narrow down to the house very soon.
I mean, they break into the house.
Exactly. So it adds a ton of tension in what might otherwise just be like, him befriending somebody, him introducing it to his family, stuff like that.
Right.
Exactly. So I think it's really important.
I put these two topics together because I think they're
very similar,
intertwined.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I don't know. To me, we stopped doing the what have you learned in the end of episodes, but when I was leaving the movie, watching it through a screenwriting lens, the thing that like stuck out to me is like this really unconventional antagonist in the movie. Like we have a faceless villain you don't see his face for 82 minutes. He's literally scripted as like his credit is Keys. That's his name in the credits.
I've seen like Spielberg call him Keys in interviews too. Like,
like he doesn't even have
that's his actual character name. Yeah.
In the novelization, I think they call him Keys, and it's a novelization.
I mean,
it's because of the keys. It's because of the keys.
Right?
So Spielberg originally toyed with the idea of not showing any faces of any of adults in this movie. I don't know.
Muppet Babies.
Kind of like
Brown.
Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown. Yeah, he toyed with that idea. I don't remember where that landed exactly,
but you'd lose the mother, and she's such an integral part of the movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I think it's so we get the faceless and nameless, and then we get the vaguest of backstories. 82 minutes in, we get 4 sentences. Like, I've been wishing for this since I was 10 years old. I don't want him to die. His being here is a miracle. I'm glad he met you first. That's it. That's all we get about the villain, and we get vague motivation. The only thing that we get comes from Elliot, which is at the dinner table when nobody believes him. He says they're gonna give him a lobotomy, and like we know, like absolutely right. So the only motivation comes from what we assume about this situation. It's not made clear, like they're after him. It's ET or bust, but like. There's no admiral in Star Wars. There's no Vader saying we have to do this. And I think it's really instructive that if you, I'm trying to dig into why this works. And I think, Jamie, you put it perfectly. It's that there's constant tension, right? Like we're constantly feeling tension. And
Keys is also somewhat complex.
Yeah.
Like he's shown to be this kind of like mustache twirling villain who we can't see his face. And then he shows up and you realize that he's looking at ET like he's like looking into the stars. Yeah. And it's way more complex than we even know.
I think I think that's key to it, because if we did show his face
to it.
Yeah, if we did show his face, it might make it less tense, because we realize he's really Elliot, right? He's like Elliot grown up or something.
He's like Elliot grown up.
Somebody that's been longing. So he's very sensitive, and everything about him is pretty nice. And for all we know, whatever he was going to do, he tries to save E.T.'s life. He could have tried to send him home in a spaceship for all we know. He seems very like a good dude, So
yeah, he grows a heart.
Yeah. And it's I think the trick is that we just show him as mysterious, so we don't realize. I'm not even sure that he grows a heart. I think he just always had one.
You reveal that he had one. Yeah.
But Spielberg reveals, oh no, he's a good guy. You know what I mean?
He's a good guy using the faculties of society in place that he has to learn about this stuff.
Right.
Yes.
There's no other thing he could belong to where he could do this.
So the twist is he might not be as bad after all as we were led to believe.
Yeah.
Which is superior position again. It's playing with our perspective, right? And using that against us to create tension and make us feel like, oh, he's not bad.
Right.
Like, that's really instructive.
Is there a name for this, guys? I think if anyone would know, you would. Like, he himself doesn't really have an arc. You say he grows a heart, but like he kind of was always that guy. Like
he's revealed to have a heart. Yeah, that's better.
But like in our audience experience, he does have an arc. You know what I mean? Like our experience of the character. Well, do you know what I mean? Like we're experiencing an
this is a
arc
little.
there,
This is like a couple talking points later on talking points on this, but it's the circus mirror, right? Like the like I think what you're talking about is just like caused by that circus mirror element. Whereas one way when you're coming up with your heroes and your villains is to kind of find a way to make them mirror images of each other. Like if Elliot makes all the wrong choices in life, if Luke makes all the wrong choices in Star Wars, he's Darth Vader. If Indy, you and I were the same, Belloc says in Raiders of the Lost Ark, if Indy makes all the wrong choices in the story, he's Belloc. If Elliot loses, because like scientists in adulthood are like fucking ruthless and they don't empathize, and they're all about like they study like cadavers
data and truth, and that's
they study like cadaver. They have to kill something to study it, right? Whereas like kids, it's all about wonder and curiosity and empathy, right? Like they learn about things through connection. And scientists, when they're older, the scientists in this movie are all about like hunting down ET to kill him and dissect him, right? Like the frogs. So I think you're speaking to like, it's almost like that connection that Elliot makes with the scientist based on his relationship with ET turns that character to look inward, almost like he's back to looking the way he was when he was Elliot's age, right? He's now like, it's almost like
if Elliot is him, then that's his arc.
Yes.
Like, right?
Yeah. I think that's what you're saying, basically.
Basically.
To the circus mirror approach.
Our experience with just the movie at surface value with Keyes is that he does go through this change, even though there is no
it's very
change.
Small. Yeah.
It's a change in our eyes and our position on him,
Yeah. But I just wanted to like one thing, like before we move on. I did this for the Hans Gruber villain's plan. So I'm constantly reading scripts. Let's break out the bingo card. Because I read amateur scripts 5 days a week. That is what I do for a living.
Right.
And I am constantly reading scripts where there's issues with the tension, the lack of tension, because we barely get to reconnect with what's happening with the villains, where they are, what they want. Have they made progress? Are they closer to getting our hero, or are they closer to achieving that thing that our hero is trying to stop them from doing, right? Like the Death Star. When in a movie like Die Hard, we get 14 villains plan updates from the moment the movie starts, and we never go more than 4 minutes without getting an update of what's happening with Hans Gruber's master plan. And that's why there's this intense sense of like momentum to the story and stopping Hans Gruber, because every 4 minutes the story never lets us forget about what he's doing and why he's doing it and whether he's getting closer to doing it for more than 5 minutes. And so like I studied this one because I think this movie does something almost identical, even though we don't really get any information about the villain themselves. So there are actually more villains plan status updates in ET than there was in Die Hard, which I never would have expected if I didn't break it down. There's 15 status updates in this movie where we're brought back. We catch up with the villains right after we've just caught up with Elliot, and we never go. There are some periods early on where we go like 7-8 minutes. So like for the first 5 to 8 minutes, the government agents are chasing ET. And they've got him on the run, and they know he's going in the direction of that town. And then 8 minutes later, we catch up with them again, and they're one step closer. Elliot sees a mysterious government agent searching for ET in the same place in the woods where he's searching for him. So the movie never goes more than 8 minutes beyond that without letting us back into what's happening with the agents. But then once it gets closer to them getting the house, they start pushing that closer. Like it's like 3 minutes, 2 minutes between what's happening with the villains. So it all averages out to we never go more than 5 minutes in this movie without catching up with the villains. And that creates this like sense of, oh my God, they're going to get him. They're going to get him. They're going to get E.T. And I just think it's really instructive that even if you don't give us much info about the villains, if you keep us on up to speed with what the hell is going on with the villains and whether they're getting closer to whatever it is they're trying to do, it fills the gap with all the stuff that's missing about the villain. You know, it does enough. So I just thought that was like the most interesting thing the movie did for me that I didn't remember it did, having seen it so many times.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it is because there isn't like the goal to get him to the spaceship doesn't come more to the midpoint. Mm-hmm. So I think they really have to crank up the tension in whatever way they can. So there's a lot of craft on display in cranking up the tension. There's a thing called, this is a Sid Field thing that I use all the time that I'm sure we've talked about here before, called a pinch point. And the pinch point in Save the Cat terms comes kind of in the middle of the fun and games. And it's like, it kind of offsets that fun and games issue where fun and games might be a little too much fun. We've talked about how fun and games don't have to be too much fun. They could be really miserable for the hero. But sometimes, like, and let's say like a Bruce Almighty or something like that, which is I always use because he's having a great time during his fun and games. Sometimes you have to remind people that this party is going to come to an end. And that's kind of what E.T.'s doing. It's saying, look, we're having fun, lots of laughs. It's a big party with these kids getting to know each other. But just know that this party is going to come to a big crashing halt by the end of this movie. And that's kind of what these check-ins are doing.
Yes.
And the pinch point is just one place for it. But this movie does it multiple times. It does it in a few different places. And they tend to escalate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. Yeah.
So at first
they're getting closer. They're getting
closer. Yeah. And so the updates are getting closer.
I mean, right. And they're done in a really creepy way, which is another, like the surveillance thing in the van, and we're
shadows
and
they're literally like breaking constitutional rights.
Because like
seriously,
like Keys, and again, I think it's all kind of a trick of cinema because Keys, all the stuff, even when they come in the spacesuits and stuff like that, it's all like, let's make them look scary. Because the one thing that it always stuck with me, the line Keys has to Elliot at that one point where he says, I don't think he was left here intentionally, but his being here is a miracle. It's and you did the best anybody could do. I'm glad he met you first. I always found that line, like, I don't know what it is about that line, but I found it super touching or something about that line. Like the villain could deliver that line.
Yeah, it reveals that he has a heart, right?
It does.
He does. I mean, that's like the
surprise
first,
audience.
There's like 3 times where he kind of does it, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
He also says, like, I'm trying to remember how that goes. I've been wishing for this since I was 10 years old or something like that,
Since I was your age,
Yeah. So
and then
circus
the
mirror,
where he just lets the ending happen without any fuss.
Also very unconventional.
Yep.
Yeah, and it works.
Yeah, there's not even a moment where he like he's trying to stop anything or like he objects or he just.
But there's tension that he would, right? Because they've done their job as a storyteller. Yeah. I just love that.
I think by the time he gets in the car with the mom, it's like it's pretty understood from the audience perspective.
But there's that chance.
There's that chance he could be like,
I just wish Keys and the mom kissed.
And just start running.
I just wish they kissed at the end. That would have been
God.
I thought you meant, Jamie, I thought you meant E.T. and Elliot.
I think they should turn and just have this big kiss in the
end. No.
Special edition.
I'm just glad the dog didn't get on the spaceship, okay?
Almost.
That always is the thing that makes me go, no. Okay. Ordinary to extraordinary exercise?
Oh yeah. So I'll try to I had a huge list, but I'm gonna try. Okay, so this is like, so much of our show is focused on the whiteboard and premise delivery, but it's really important to talk about the how, not just the what and the why. So, like, what is the essence of premise delivery? It's like taking something ordinary and using the premise to make it extraordinary. Jamie, do you want to explain the concept of premise paint that we use all the time on the show, and then I'll bounce off of that?
Yeah, sure. And so, premise paint, the idea is kind of a whiteboard technique, or a whiteboard, I don't know, almost a mentality when you approach your whiteboard, that if you can just list like what you'd expect to see in a movie like this out on your whiteboard, and maybe there's some other idea. So what would you expect to see in an alien movie or something, or
it's the what if question about ET. Like, what is that what if?
And then special powers and fish out of water stuff. Like, you mean like that?
Yeah, it's stuff like that. Exactly. Yeah. And then maybe what you can do also is then you can come up and say, well, what's extra unique about this story? And this one, it's because it's kids, let's say, because kids are involved, and modern day kids for that matter. So that's one of the things I saw. So, and this kind of feeds into the mundane side that Jimmy's about to talk about, because a lot of the stuff, like, instead of having a car chase, because it's kind of a thriller movie, right? We have a BMX bike chase, or something like that. How do we make a communicator? We make it out of a speak and spell, so the paint is kind of, to me, the mundane kid stuff that you can kind of go and paint over the other stuff.
Yeah. So I basically look at it like the paint is the what if scenario, the what if situation of the movie. Like, what if a lost alien stumbled into a suburban American kid's house and formed a bond with him? That's your premise, right? That's your premise paint. So the simplest, like, essence of premise delivery is like taking something ordinary and using your premise to give us something that we could only experience in this movie. And it's why people keep coming back. It's why 40 years later, we're all still loving it, because it's so unique and specific to this world and this what if scenario that we could only get it when we watch TV. I mean, watch ET. And
I worked with Jamie's book.
So
read about TV and save the cat rights for TV.
So when you're coming up with ideas, okay, you've got your premise and you've sort of got this, you're doing whiteboards. What are ordinary people, places, things, scenarios, and dialogue that you could add your premise paint onto and give us something that we could only experience? So, for example, the Reese's Pieces. They're ordinary candy, but you put premise paint on it, and it's alien bait that a little kid uses to draw the alien from outside into his house, right? That's premise specific. Potted flowers. You put premise paint on the dying potted flowers, and it becomes this thing to show ET's powers and to give us sort of a measuring stick of ET's health status. Those are flowers that we could only get in this movie. The fruit, ET is eating fruit. You put just basic fruit and you put premise paint on it. ET makes the fruit float into a solar system diagram to show Elliot where his home is. That is fruit that that is some mundane fruit that when you put the premise paint on it, it becomes extraordinary, right? And so the Buck Rogers comic, in any other movie, it's just a comic. In this movie, it becomes ET's like inspiration for getting home and his way to communicate with others what his plan is and the audience. So it's that Buck Rogers comic becomes something extraordinary and something we could only get when we pop in ET. Sesame Street is just, a show that's been on for decades. But in this movie, you put premise paint on Sesame Street, it becomes Gertie's way of teaching ET how to talk.
Right, yeah.
So that is an episode that is a use of Sesame Street that we could only get in this movie. So, and the jangling keys, right? You take some ordinary keys, you put premise paint on it, it becomes like a harbinger of government agent doom for ET. So it's just can
I add the Halloween costume?
Dude, there's so much, dude.
Yeah, like the Halloween costume is the way they sneak out ET, but the Halloween costume is just a normal costume on Halloween of a shitty ghost, really.
Right, and then they take a scenario. They take that to your point, ordinary scenario, put premise paint on it, make it extraordinary and premise specific. They see somebody dressed up like Yoda, and E.T. thinks that it's an alien, and he says home, right? So that is
that's because E.T. is a Jedi and he uses
but that is a way to show, like, if you're trying to learn what is premise delivery, right? What does it mean to deliver on the promise of the premise? What does it mean to make something special out of something basic? This movie has like endless examples of that. And even they do it with tropes, right? Like the home invasion. What does a home invasion look like in this movie with this premise? It's government agents dressed like astronauts invading a house and abducting an alien from the house. What does like Jamie said, what does a car chase look like in this premise? It's E.T. literally letting using its powers to have the bikes fly over the police car. So it's just,
what does an alien drinking beer look like in this premise?
And what does beer drinking look like with premise paint? It's
him getting, both of them getting drunk at the same time in different locations while also
simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah.
Even like how does ET show a map of space, for example?
Yep. Right.
All these little things.
The fruit, the fruit floating in the air. So it's if you want to, it's a really simple brainstorming technique that you can just be like, okay, like there's it,
where can ET hide in a house among other weird looking small dolls?
Right. So they take the ordinary
place in the house, right?
So they take that ordinary, those ordinary dolls on shelf, and now it becomes something extraordinary that expresses the movie perfectly.
By the way, legend says that was Robert Zemeckis' idea.
It's so good. But deconstructing like what screenwriting is, to me at its purest, this is screenwriting. To me at its purest, all of my favorite moments, all of my favorite moments in cinema do this. The water, the rippling water in Jurassic Park, Spielberg. The mashed potato mountain is that's what I like to call this technique, the mashed potato mountain. The mashed potato mountain in Close Encounters, right? Like those are mashed potatoes that you put those mashed potatoes in any other movie. You're like, what the fuck is this? But you put them in Close Encounters, and we totally understand that this is we can only see this in Close Encounters. So, and when I'm reading scripts all day, like this is the part of the craft that people don't seem to care about. They don't seem to want to learn. They don't seem to understand that it's what makes a stack of 50 screenplays stand out from the pack. The screenplays that do this stand alone, and like I read scripts all day that like they nail character, right? Like there's the dialogue, snappy, conflict galore, memorable scenes. But my number one note now, after 6 years of doing this, is not premise specific enough.
Can I say it in a more mundane way? Almost like you write stuff you could only see here.
Yeah.
And
I think that the reason that
like,
E.T. is so has stood the test of time is because fade in to fade out. That's all it is. You can never see any of this stuff in any other movie.
Right.
So I'm super passionate about it.
I mean, honestly, that's like one bit of advice you could like, if you had nothing else, you could say that.
Yeah.
Do stuff that
premise
you can only
paint
do
is everything.
In this premise.
Premise paint is everything. And that's Jamie's concept.
Oh, yeah.
I've just piggybacked off of it.
Most of them are Jamie's concept.
That's right.
That's that Jamie Nash magic.
Does that doesn't incorporate premise pretzels, right? But
that's premise pretzels. I thought that pretzels. I liked listening to Jamie talk about this.
Yeah.
And so I thought this would be a fun time to talk about.
Give us the rundown, Jamie.
Yeah, the premise pretzel. He says he likes. I mean, this is something that I thought up, but I think Jimmy does a better job of explaining at this point. I forgot now to explain it. But premise pretzels are kind of like they're kind of like an advanced version of setup and payoff in some ways. You set something up, you pay it off, then you pay it off in a different way, then you pay it off in a different way, then you pay it, then you pay it off in reverse, then you do, so it's really just getting the most mileage of the setup payoff kind of idea. And that's really what, looking at it from all angles, doing it in reverse, doing it and honestly, if you whiteboard and think in these terms, you'll brainstorm lots of great ideas. If you could say, well, what's the reverse of that? What's the mirror image of that?
In this movie, a child is shown to drive a car in reverse, and then he's later shown to do the reverse of that, which is
exactly that's a premise pretzel, right?
Right.
Yeah, Jamie, my favorite way that you put this is that you want to try to take, when you come up with an idea, you want to try to come up with ideas that you don't just use once, so that nothing's throwaway, so that everything is a setup, or a payoff in some little way, so that there's not a wasted moment. And that can include just little things so my favorite example, there's two premise pretzels that Bob just named, a great one that I didn't even list, but it is a premise pretzel. That's the idea, the idea folding it on itself and doing the reverse of the same idea.
Makes a note of showing the kid doing it.
Yeah.
And later he has to drive a car.
Right. It seems like they make it a joke, right? But we don't know that's their clever way of hiding that it's a setup for a great payoff later, right?
Right.
But there's two that I really love, and they both incorporate the same twist, which is the original idea is the umbrella. E.T. opens it and it scares E.T. and it scares Elliot into dumping the milk. We laugh, right? It's kind of funny. He's discovery. But then they take that idea and they twist it, and it becomes the satellite dish for E.T.'s interstellar communication device. They could have just thrown it away. They could have just had that one moment, but they found a way to take that idea they came up with and use it again in a completely different, fresh way. And then it makes that earlier moment feel even more special, And the same thing with the saw blade, right? He cuts his finger on the saw blade, and we have that great moment where we learn that E.T. has the power to heal wounds. And then later they reverse it, and it's part of that interstellar communication device, right? So they take another idea that we thought was just this one special moment, and they use it again. So
and you could also add to that exact moment, Jimmy, when he sees the Halloween costume of the knife through the head, and he thinks it's another blade cutting another being.
Exactly. So they use that again.
They use it again, right?
Ouch.
There.
Yeah.
Right. Ouch. Right. Exactly.
So that's another pretzel of that one single idea. You're right, Bob. Yeah. Right. So this is a great example of this is another thing about this movie you could study is how to take an idea, a simple idea like the umbrella gag, and use it in 2 or 3 more ways.
I did this. It's interesting. Right before our podcast, I was working on a script, and I did this. I do this by nature almost at this point, because sometimes it doesn't come to you on the whiteboard, right? Sometimes. So today I was going through a script, and I found something. This is a ghost movie, right? And I had a scene with kids sidewalk chalk, and it was kind of some drawing happened or something. And it was kind of later in the movie. And I realized, because I was doing my iteration thing, which I highly suggest after you write a script, go through it over and over and over, because that's when you start connecting. That scene earlier where I had the girl who died, I had her playing on an iPad, but instead she's now using sidewalk chalk. You know what I mean? And I was able to connect the two. So I kind of went in reverse. Sometimes you think of it as going into the future, but sometimes if you have these kind of moments that aren't connected to anything, you can kind of go back and start feeding them. Yep. And then from there, I went and I added it one more place, toward the end. I added, I used the sidewalk chalk in even a different way. I kind of came up with another way.
You found another organic spot.
Another organic.
Yeah, in a new way. Yeah.
So
exactly.
It's not all, it's like you're saying, it's not always something you have to come up before you sit down.
Right. It organically works itself in.
You can go back, right?
One of the reasons I love doing after my first draft, where I kind of get the whole story together and write it all out, I love the second. I call it it's second draft, but it's really my first good draft, because that's usually when I find all this stuff. Usually I'm going through and I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, I can use that. I can go back. Okay, yeah, I can use that. And I do a lot of that in my first
that's like
pass.
the meat on the bones, though. You know what I mean?
It is.
That makes
Yes.
it feel like it's cohesive.
Yes.
Yep.
Let's talk about the power of repetition, which is
Yeah,
really strong
speaking
in this
of-
movie. Yeah, speaking of going back and repeating things.
Yeah, I'm going to set it up, and I feel like you guys probably know the movie well enough that I don't have to say all of them. You can like name them all. You know what I mean?
I feel like they're the famous quotes from the movie.
It comes in so many ways. So one way to create like a deeper bond between the audience and the characters is to use repetition. And like when you take some idea, and it could be just like I was talking about with the premise paint, it could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a thing, it could be dialogue, it could be a scenario, it could be a combination of those things, but it doesn't have to always be a combination. It could just be one of them. When you take the same scenario and you repeat it, it creates this pattern, and the audience has this understanding that it's special, right? And so we feel something stronger about something we saw before. And a really easy way to tell these mini stories and to show like the progression of characters is to do like a rule of three, which is like you set up the idea, you give us a repetition of it, and then you reverse it with showing the growth and change. So like beginning, middle, and end. Bob, you have another way. It's like comedy, Bob. You have a good way of
set up, establish, payoff.
Set up. It's just like a joke, right? And this concept does have its roots in vaudeville, in the stage, in comedy.
Right.
So I think what stands out most about this movie, The Craft, is there's so much use of repetition in this way. There's so many different rule of threes in this story. I mean, I feel like I go for it, guys. Like talk about some and I'll bounce off of you.
I just go down here. Dialogue. I'll be right here. Elliot, he kind of says it passively to E.T. in the beginning, right? Like it's not a major moment,
right?
But then E.T. like logs it as something big for him, right?
Yeah, it's like one of the first things he says to him. Yeah,
right. And of course, that's his parting words to Elliot. You know.
Yeah, there's 3 beats for that. So Elliot says it to try to kind of make him feel safe, even though he doesn't know how to take care of anything. And then in the middle, when they're on the hospital beds together, and E.T. is trying, we have a repetition moment there. E.T. is dying, and Elliot's trying to comfort him and tell him to stay. Right. He says, "I'll be right here." And then we have in the end, E.T. says it to Elliot. So we have that reversal. E.T. says it to Elliot, as he's saying goodbye. So it hits hard because of those 3 beats. Another one is "be good." So I've started. I'm breaking out a new term, even though we're pressed for time. We have like 10 minutes. I've been using this term to help some clients, and it's so far it's worked. So this is a soft test, and we'll keep playing with it as the show goes on. I call them handshakes. Simple as that. Like a really easy, because ultimately I think this repetition that we talk about a lot, I think we could like codify it into different types. We just haven't done it, and nobody really has for us to draw from. But I think if we took the time to say, like, what is this doing? What is this repetition doing? They're all kind of taking different routes. And I think handshakes is like, when you're trying to come up with a shortcut for how can I show a character's relationship really fast so that every time those 2 characters are interacting, I instantly get it. Like I don't have to spend more than 10 seconds and I'm back remembering everything I remember about these 2 characters together. And so I'm calling them handshakes. So far, I've seen handshakes coming in. I'm staying with the G's. Greetings. So like sloth. Hey, you guys. Games, Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. Guidance, use the force, carpe diem. And goodbye. Spock, whenever he says goodbye, he says live long and prosper. And then the story sometimes uses that to show how the relationships are in danger or in jeopardy, or Spock is in jeopardy. They use those handshakes. So it's just like a shortcut. And with this one, I think be good tracks as a handshake, right? Like it's guidance, right? Like she's teaching E.T. how to speak, and we get a nice repetition with that. The next time she shows Elliot that she taught him how to speak, and he says, be good, be good, right. Be good. And she's like, I taught him that. So it's a handshake between Gertie and E.T. And then in the end, E.T. says it to Gertie, and that's pretty much the only thing about their relationship that we've seen, right? Like, but it hits so hard.
Yeah.
So I think this is another way. I'm going to keep playing with it as the show goes along, but this is like something I've been using with my clients to quickly deepen the relationships on the page in a really simple way. And I think this is a good way to do that. Like 3 moments with the handshakes. So
cool.
Those were the ones I wanted to talk about. New term. We already talked about the flowers, so we can skip the flowers.
Interesting. The shutters, the visual of the shutters. Because that comes into play a lot, you know, with the figures in the shutters and peeking through and the lights coming through them. I was watching today because I wanted to remind myself, we don't have a thing about this, but one thing I forgot to mention, that this script was close to the first draft of the script, if not the first draft. And Spielberg always claims it was like one of the best, if not the best, first draft he ever read.
Wow.
And
awesome.
And they didn't cut a lot.
High praise.
Yeah, but the one scene they did cut is this really cheeseball scene with Harrison Ford as the principal, where he's levitating. Have you ever seen this? Elliot's levitating. But when I watched that today, I was watching it for another reason, which I'll talk about in 1 second. There's a big Shutter influence in that too. So it's just shadows coming in and like crisscrossing Elliot's face from outside, and it's like the shutters. So when you put this down, I was like, hey, there's those shutters again. They did that again, that same visual of shutters and the sunlight coming through them.
It's also, I think it's supposed to also be reminiscent of like the alien spaceship.
Yeah, I brought it up is sometimes it doesn't have to be the exact thing that you're repeating. Sometimes it's just like a visual motif.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
And that visual motif, you can put this on the whiteboard, right? You can be like, okay, I know that that when E.T. is officially lost and his family on the ship is looking down at him, it's through like this shutter looking thing. You got that one image to build off of. You're like, okay, like how can I spider web ideas off of this to play with that visual motif and make the audience to show the progression and make us feel like we're getting E.T. closer to that parent at the beginning. And that's how you do the same sort of idea where you do good news, bad news with that visual motif, right? So like there's so many, like E.T.'s, Elliot's mom is looking through the closet as E.T.'s hiding in the stuffed animals. We see her through the shutters. E.T.'s looking through the shutters later when Elliot's mom is reading the storybook to Gertie. So he's like missing his parent, you know, and that's another reminder that he's got to get home in this visual motif. And then the government agents are looking through the shutters before they invade E.T.'s house. So that's a bad news version of it. And then in the end, E.T. is looking through the shutters at Elliot as he leaves.
Yeah. So
it's this great, they did a whiteboard, right? They took that visual motif and they were like, how can we play with that in as many interesting ways as possible? But it's very intentional. It's very much giving us status updates about E.T.'s progression toward getting home. And then the last version of it is showing E.T. on his way home, right? So I think that's craft. I think you can learn from that. You do stuff like that.
I would be interested to know if that was actually found in the script or if that was like a cinematography piece of the craft.
If that was a Spielberg thing.
Yeah. Like either way,
well, regardless,
it doesn't matter. It's great.
We count the movie as the last draft of the script.
For our purposes, it is
from a learning standpoint. I think you can take these examples and you could do something that fits your movie perfectly in a way that as this extra right, we connect with it deeper because of those things. You feel it, you know, because of that. So
one of the reason I looked up that the deleted scenes though, because this scene blew my mind, and it is an example of repetition, but one that got cut because they realized what they had. They had a different ending on the movie originally. Have you seen this ending? It blew my mind when I saw it. This almost sounds like this sounds like a setup I'm doing for a bit, but it's not. Like then I'm going to say something crazy.
Now, Jamie, was this the OG ending, or was this an all ending just in case?
No, this was their original planned ending. So if you find E.T. script is online, you can find it, and it's in the script. So the original ending was then they cut back to a Dungeons and Dragons, so another repetition thing with all the other kids.
Okay, repetition.
But this time Elliot's the DM, and he's saying some stuff that's somewhat thematic,
and then showing how the story has characters change using repetition.
Exactly, and then this is where it gets kind of cheesy, and apparently what happened was Spielberg saw how great the music was in the end of that thing, and it was like, we can't top this, and he just cut this final scene.
It's a perfect cut to black. It's a perfect cut, and
so then the camera raises up. And again, you can see this online. There's footage of it. And on top of the roof of the house is the communicator, like implying that Elliot's still in touch with E.T.
Still like talking to E.T.
And then it goes to black. So again, too little repetitive.
I don't miss it.
No.
Yeah, but the repetition, so they were using it even in the end.
I wouldn't completely hate it. I don't think it would have changed the movie's success. But I'm glad it's like it is.
That's like a post-credit scene now.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what it feels like.
To him.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, I know Jamie's got to go, so I don't want to. I'm gonna skip the next. Yeah.
It's all good.
That's good. No, I think we
covered a lot.
We covered a lot of stuff. No, that's good. We've already plugged everything we need to plug.
Yes.
And what the only thing I'm gonna say before we leave out is, if you're a fan of the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever app that you use.
Please. Right? Yeah, 86 episodes. This is the first time we're asking. It really helps the show.
We're going to start asking for a lot more stuff. So
we are
prepared for that. There's going to be a lot of stuff.
Your patience mostly.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, like basically whatever your app lets you do. I don't know what people listen to stuff on it at all, but yeah.
And thank you to those who have taken the time to review. It really helps.
And just everyone who has ever said anything online about the show, shared the show, listened.
It's awesome.
Yeah, we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, and basically what we realized is we kind of did this podcast for the last 80 some episodes without really trying to promote it to people and things like that. And people are discovering it and really digging it. And we'd like more people to do that, which gives us more incentive to keep doing it. And if you just get a second or anything like that to promote it in any way, especially a review, a retweet, something like that, just so people find it, we'd be greatly appreciative. And that's basically our plan. That's our insidious plan.
It's a simple,
it's real insidious.
Really, we got nothing complex going on here. But yeah, that's everything, guys. E.T.
Yes.
We got more Spielberg on the way eventually, right? We got
big time. Yeah.
Yep. We're a Spielberg loving podcast. So that's everything. Thanks
for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.